Two countries and two legendary comfort foods, but who does it better? On one side, we've got the French with the Hachis Parmentier. Rich, slow-cooked meat covered in silky mashed potato and delicious cheese on the top, with a bit of bistro flair thrown in there. And the other side, an absolute weeknight classic all around the world, from across the channel in Britain, or is it Ireland? The shepherd's pie. Hearty, gravy-loaded meat with lots of mashed potato that warms you all over, starting from the inside out. It was one of my favorites growing up, and to be perfectly honest, I didn't even know the French had a version until not that long ago. Now, both these dishes come from times when food was scarce, so we made sure we used everything we could to feed and nourish our families. And often these dishes are some of the best going around. But who does it best? Well, I'm not sure, but today I'm gonna run you through both these amazing dishes, and we're gonna start with the French one, the Hachis Parmentier. Let's get stuck in. Hachis Parmentier. You have no idea how many times I have tried to practice to say that with the correct pronunciation. You can, I think it's commonly done now with beef mince in France, but traditionally this dish was to use up leftover stewed meat. So we're gonna honor that by stewing some meat. Not using leftover stewed meat, we're gonna stew some meat. We're gonna stew this meat. So we call this an oyster blade. In the US, it's called a flat iron. Well, it's called a flat iron when you kind of cut it up. The crazy thing about this meat, unlike many other pieces of meat, is you can use it for braising because it has this big piece of sinew, hard to see, but it runs right down the center of the two muscles. And that big piece of sinew or big piece of connective tissue is what makes it good for braising because it gets all gelatinous and keeps the meat nice and moist. However, if you take all this silver skin and stuff off and then you cut this muscle off, similar on this side, and then you cut this muscle off, then you run down between these two muscles and you take that piece of that connective tissue out, you also have really delicious steaks. Fun facts with Andy. But we're gonna braise it. So we're gonna cut this into pieces and you're gonna get a better example of that piece of sinew that runs right through the middle, right there. And apparently in the UK, this is also called a butler steak or a feather blade steak, although I've never heard of them being called that, but there you go. Anyway, we're gonna dice this into big chunks like this. I'm not going to trim it at all. All that stuff will break down. We will cook this for a long enough time that actually all this connective tissue is good because it'll keep the meat nice and moist. So we're going to season all these pieces of meat with salt. You don't want heaps of salt. You obviously want to season your meat. Obviously it's super important. However, if you over season a braise like this, it makes it very hard to use the cooking liquid at the end, which is what we're going to do. We're going to braise the meat, reduce the cooking liquid to the right consistency. We might need to thicken it, which we can do so then. And then we'll fold that back through the meat that we pull apart. So I've got my big Dutch oven here that I'm going to use to cook all this meat in on a high heat. Get that heating up. In a separate bowl, just going to add a bit of flour. I'm going to season our flour also. Mix that through. Move this to the side. Good drizzle of olive oil into our Dutch oven. So take our meat, our oil's almost hot. We're gonna do this in batches because we don't want to overcrowd the pan. I'm gonna dust our pieces of meat in flour and then tap off any excess. Once the oil's hot, in they go. That's not hot. I reckon we're gonna have to do 3 batches with this amount of meat. You could just use chuck for this, or any stewing meat really. Chuck would work well, brisket would work well. If you wanted to be really fancy, short ribs would be delicious in here, but probably a bit of an expensive way to do it. Or you could just use beef mince. Obviously you're not braising meat. You're probably going to do it a lot more like we're about to do in the second dish, the shepherd's pie. While those are sealing off, we're going to talk about veggies. So here I've got 2 large carrots, which I've peeled, and I've cut them into really big pieces. I've also got 2 swede, which I've also peeled and kept in nice big chunks. We don't actually need those right now. We're going to put those in halfway through when this meat is cooking in the oven. And I'll explain why we do that later on. 2 onions, we're just going to dice. It's going to cook for a long time, so you don't have to be too pedantic about it. And I've got about 6 cloves of garlic, which I'm just going to smash and then run my blade through a couple of times. The garlic will completely break down, so push that to the side. We'll put that in at a separate time than the onions, so don't mix them up. And then I've got 2 sticks of celery. Just take those leaves off. And these we're going to kind of rough chop as well. And then I got a small bunch of thyme, a few bay leaves, some tomato puree, red wine, some good quality beef stock, and some balsamic vinegar. Once our meat has got good colour, like this, on all sides, just going to remove it from the pot and set it aside and continue with the rest. Pull this out. I've turned the heat off the bottom of that pan. We don't want this to burn too much. You can see here, that's burnt flour, the black stuff. The bottom, this dark stuff, that's caramelized flour, I guess, which is fine. That's kind of what we want. But this here, take a paper towel and just wipe that black stuff off, but just be careful. We've got lots of hot fat in here. Heat back on, onions in, a little pinch of salt, and start to soften. And scrape up all that lovely, meaty, floury fond off the bottom. Once those onions start to go a bit translucent and they've softened up, say 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, you're gonna add the celery, the garlic, and about a tablespoon of tomato puree. Stir that through. We've got our beef. I'm gonna add that back in on the top. And any liquid that's come off it you can add as well. Next comes the red wine. Little splash of balsamic vinegar, say 1 tablespoon. So our wine has reduced by half. It's looking luscious. We're gonna add the thyme, bay leaves, and beef stock. Give it a little jiggle around so that everything's reasonably well mixed together. So lid on, we're gonna bring this to a light simmer. Woo, making some noise. Light simmer in the oven, 140 degrees, 4 hours in total. After 2 hours, we're gonna put that root veg in that I talked about earlier. We'll show you that then. All right, it's been 2 hours. I'm gonna pull this meat out. I'm gonna carefully remove the lid from this pot, and then we're gonna slowly put in our swede and our carrot. Make sure it's relatively well submerged in stock. Back in the oven, 140 degrees for another 2 hours. Our beef's been cooking for 4 hours. Let's get it out of the oven. All right, we're just gonna let this chill out and come down in temperature a bit so we can handle it. So while we're waiting for that to happen, let's get the potatoes cooking. So in Australia here, I'm using Sabagos. If you're in the UK, if you're in the US, you're probably looking for russet Burbanks. And in the UK, like Morris Piper. But you're looking for a mashing potato. We're gonna cut these up into pieces of roughly this size, into cold water, big pinch of salt, and then onto boil. We want these completely cooked. Should be able to put a fork or a cake tester or something in it and it kind of falls apart. You don't want to completely mush them. You want them still holding together, but you do want them fully cooked. So to get our base or our meat ready, we've got our stewed beef. It's worth mentioning also that this dish is actually, I think, mainly commonly made with minced beef like it is in the UK and France now. But it was traditionally made to use up old stewing meat like we're using here. I think it's a nice point of difference to the English versions, or I don't know whether to call it English or Irish at this point. So we're gonna pull all the meat and the veggies out, and we don't really want it to break up too much if we can. What I'm gonna do is dice up all these veggies and pull this meat apart while we get the sauce ready, and then we'll stir the sauce back through the meat and veggies. But just like the original where they don't waste anything, I'm not gonna waste any of these beautiful veggies. We're gonna put them through the mix because they're full of flavor. I'm gonna put this back on the heat. I'm gonna reduce it until the seasoning's correct, so until the salt levels are right, and then we'll thicken it. I'm gonna take all this beautiful stewed beef and veggies. Start with the veggies. If they're still hot, be careful, and just dice them up. Because we added these later in the cook, they should hold their shape. So add the swede and the carrots. So add those to one bowl. We're gonna keep them separate so that we can control the ratio when we're mixing everything together. And then with the beef, this stuff should just pull apart, just flake away like that into a bowl. Yum. Continue with all of that. I wouldn't add the celery though. That does have a tendency to go bitter. Leave that. Then we'll thicken our sauce and we'll make one harmonious filling. Now, if you're thinking, Andy, why don't you just dice them before you cook them? It's a very valid question. And the reason is because if we dice them before we cook them, they'll just kind of turn to mush and just be kind of absorbed into the sauce. They do tend to go a bit like vegetable-y, which is kind of a weird term considering it's a vegetable. If they go like that, they kind of, they have that kind of harsh vegetable taste that overcooked veggies get, and the reason why kids often don't like veggies. So if we keep them nice and big like we have here, they'll hold their shape. It means we can dice them, fold them through carefully. They shouldn't go bitter and yuck, and we still get to eat them. Hey, party! Did I blow myself out? I did. when you're making potatoes of any type, make sure you stir them every now and then. It means that they cook more evenly. Okay, I'm almost done with these veggies because you only really want about, and you can just eyeball this, a third in volume of the diced veggies to the meat. I think any more than that, you know, and you're kind of taking away from the star of the show, which is that beautiful slow braised beef. So I think that's enough for me. I'm going to clean up because I've made a mess, and then we'll finish our sauce and mix it all together. Our sauce is looking lovely. I'm just trying to decide whether we need to thicken it or not. So we need to thicken it. We're going to make a quick roux to do that. What I'm going to do first is pass it in the interest of French gastronomy. Pass everything. You know, and the reality is you could not pass it if you didn't really want to. Is it going to make a difference to the final dish? I don't know, but we'll do it anyway. You know, do things properly. I think it is going to need to be thickened because we do want it to stick to the meat and veggies pretty well. I don't want it like English gravy thick. That's why you're passing it. You're getting rid of all that. I mean, that won't taste bad. It'd be a little bit bitter probably. It's lots of fine bits of vegetable matter, and maybe it is worthwhile passing. I'm going to keep our sauce just ticking away over there. Make a quick roux. So we've got like 50 grams of butter here. Let that melt. Add the same amount. We're actually going to add about 60 grams of flour. Whisk that through, get a good color on it. Then we'll whisk it through our sauce to thicken it. Now you could just use corn flour to thicken this, but I figure since we're doing it French style, we'll make a roux. So I got the idea from this video from a guy who I follow online, Matthew Ryle, I think his name is. Sorry, Matt, if I've mispronounced your last name there. Who's a really amazing chef based in London, has a cool French brasserie there, and makes some great content. So I'll link his channel below. So once that butter was melted, I've just added the flour. I'm gonna whisk that in, and we need to cook this flour out before we use it as a roux. Yeah, I saw Matt make a video about this dish, and it kind of sparked my interest, so I started doing a bit of research about it. And then I was wondering who made it first. So that made me go down the rabbit hole of researching the shepherd's pie, which was actually called the cottage pie until like the 19th century. Now, I've always said, and I still stand by this, a cottage pie is beef, a shepherd's pie is lamb. And I think that's kind of widely accepted, but it was cottage pie at the start. The other thing I wanted to know where it came from. I always thought it was an English dish. I think apparently it was actually an Irish dish. They got widely adopted all throughout the United Kingdom and Ireland. But it does appear that the French bet the Irish. I think the first recorded version of a cottage pie, which now we're making a shepherd's pie, a version of, was like the late 1700s. And the first mention of this dish from France was in the early 1700s. And it was invented by the gentleman who brought potatoes to France, which kind of makes sense. His name was, let me check. I'll make sure I get pronunciation kind of right. Antoine-Augustin Parmentier, which is why the dish is named that. Food history, it's fascinating. There's always lots of arguments about who started what. So I've got this much roux here, and I reckon I'm going to start whisking in about half of it to our sauce, just to see how that turns out. And that is looking lovely. So whisk it in nicely, make sure it's all completely absorbed, and I think that's all the amount that we're going to need. It obviously changes color a little bit. That's okay, it looks kind of chocolatey, but I am liking that consistency more. Turn that temperature down low, let that just tick away on the side, and let's get back to our mash. Oh, worth mentioning, save this. Put this in your fridge in a small container. Next time you need to thicken something, pull it out of the fridge, break it into whatever you're thickening. So potatoes have been cooking for 35 minutes now, and I reckon they're pretty much done. You should be able to just kind of pierce it straight through with anything really, like the back of a spoon. That's fork tender. You slice it open, it'll hold its shape, but it's fully cooked. So we put them back on the colander on top of the pot that they're in and just let them sit there for 5 minutes. What that does is let any extra water evaporate from the outside of the potato. Water is the enemy at this point. What we're trying to do is incorporate fat and flavor and get rid of any moisture. So while those potatoes are steaming, we're gonna get the meat ready to go in the bottom of our dish. So I've got an oven-safe dish here. This is called a 2.4 quart one because it's American, but it'll be right here at what that is in litres. But it's roughly 30 centimetres by, I don't know, 20, 18 centimetres. This is too much meat for this dish. The recipe will be for 4 people, which will probably be about half the amount of this meat here. Meat, our diced veggies, and our beautiful rich sauce. So fold it through just like you're baking a cake. What we're trying not to do is to break up the meat too much more. We don't want the veg to mash up too much more. We do want it to all be lovely and evenly coated in that beautiful rich sauce. We take our dish and we start laying in our meat. Make sure it's probably 2/3 full, the dish, with meat. And then we're going to have 1/3 full of potato. I might have put a little bit too much in there, but that's all right. I'm imagining in the 1700s it was probably more 50-50 or even 1/3, 2/3 potato. Meat was a luxury back then. All right, we'll let that hang out. Let's mash some potatoes. Just the same as if you saw the beef cheek pie video, same as that. Use the same pot, it's fine, just make sure there's no liquid in the bottom. I like using a ricer. If you don't have a ricer, you can use a hand masher, that's fine, or a moulie. Well, there we go, it's very French, or a moulie. But I prefer a ricer. So push all your potatoes through your ricer. So we're going to keep this very French and use a whole lot of butter. So I just got some cold butter, in that goes. Then we'll whisk that through, and then we'll just use milk, cold milk, to get to the right consistency that we're looking for, because I do want to pipe this. I think that's one of the other differences between shepherd's pie and the French version, because I think the mash is probably a little bit, well, it's definitely smoother, and it's definitely a lot richer. So don't put all the milk that I've put in on the recipe. Just put a little bit in at a time and mix it, because it just depends on if you don't use the exact same variety of potatoes as me, or cook them a little bit more or a little bit less, really determines on how much moisture that they take to get to the right consistency that you're looking for. So use the recipe as a guide on this and use your instincts to get the right kind of consistency. You also don't want to overwork mashed potato too much, so don't whisk and whisk and whisk them, or you'll end up with quite stiff, like quite gluey mash almost. So this really is a bit of an optional step. You can just put that on there, but I'm going to be a bit fancy and pipe it on. We use piping bags a lot in restaurants, because if you're doing this type of dish in a restaurant, to save time when you're in service, you'd heat this base up first, put it into your dish. You'd probably be serving it in a similar shaped dish to this, but a lot smaller. So you'd heat the base up, put it in the dish, and you'd have piping bags of mash like above the burner, kind of keeping warm, and you'd pipe them on, and then you just put them under the salamander or the grill to finish the top. There you go, kitchen secrets. Ironically, there's a small French bulldog at my feet right now who quite likes the look of this pie. You think you're French, that you deserve it? You're not a true Frenchman, you're a pretend Frenchman. I'm going to grate some cheese on this, and we're going to use a French classic, Comté. Melts well, beautiful nuttiness, lovely and sweet, beautiful cheese. I love this cheese. Generous grating of the Comté over the top, get that nice gratinated golden top. If you can't find Comté, you could use Gruyere, would work really well, a similar flavor profile. And if you can't find Gruyere, I'd probably go like a Pecorino, some kind of sheep's milk manchego, trying to suggest other, sometimes hard to find cheeses with other hard to find cheeses is not very helpful, Andrew. So the oven's on 160 fan force, and I reckon that's going to take 25 to 30 minutes. If you're cooking this from cold, it's going to take a lot longer because you're trying to heat everything up. But given that our meat is at room or ambient temperature, even slightly above, and our mash is still reasonably warm, it'll take 25 minutes. We're really just looking for that top to be lovely and gratinated. So it's been in the oven for about 20 minutes, and I've just turned it to grill. I can see that the meat's nice and hot because it's bubbling at the sides, but I want some more color on the top. So I don't reckon it'll take long. Once you turn your oven to grill, make sure you keep an eye on it. So let's see. Ooh, golden brown and delicious. Now, whatever you do, don't bite into this straight away. You will destroy your mouth. Let it rest for 10 minutes before you serve it. But psych, because we're going to cook the other one first anyway. Shepherd's pie. Now, I grew up on this dish. We used to eat it a lot. I kind of know how to make it reasonably well. It's worth saying, lots of ways to make this. If you make this differently, or your mum or dad makes this differently, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know what differences you have in your shepherd's or cottage pie. So I've got two pans here. The big frying pans for me to seal off the meat. The small kind of saute pan with sides is for it to all come together. So we're going to do our onions and garlic in there. So I'm just going to get those ready first. I've got one carrot, it's going to simply peel and finely dice. Now the origins of this dish are actually, I think they're thought to come from Ireland, not. It's often kind of referred to as it's come from Scottish. Like the French one, it wasn't always necessarily ground meat. It's often chopped meat. If you think about when this dish was invented, in the 1700s, late 1700s, there was no such thing as ground meat or minced beef. So they would use leftover stewed meat to make this dish, or they'd finely chop it. Also, interestingly, every time I do a lamb dish on YouTube, it doesn't perform as well. And I think that's because even though I grew up eating lamb, and a lot of people in Australia and New Zealand and England grew up eating lamb, Americans don't eat much lamb, I don't think. So if you're an American and you like or dislike lamb, let me know in the comments, because I think it's super interesting that if you don't grow up with it, then you're kind of not really into it, because lamb can be a bit gamey for some people. I love it. So I'm just going to finely dice this onion. I'm going to go in the pan at the same time, so it doesn't matter if it gets mixed up a bit. Then I'm just going to get some rosemary ready, because once we start kind of cooking, it'll all kind of come together pretty quickly. So we want to make sure we're on plus, as we call it, or everything in place. That's about 3 sprigs, and I reckon that's enough. I love rosemary, but it can get pretty overpowering if you use too much of it. Just run your knife through it. Doesn't need to be super, super fine. Just going to do maybe 3 or 4 cloves of garlic, not heaps, but just, you know, a little bit of something. Just give it a smash, then run the knife through it. So the only other things we're going to need, some frozen peas right at the end. I don't know why, but people hate peas for some reason. If you don't like peas, just leave them out. Tomato puree, a couple of dry bay leaves. Why dry? Well, that's because my mum always used dry bay leaves. So panko, but that's for the top with the cheese. But then some Worcestershire sauce and a little bit of, ideally lamb stock, but it's, you know, beef stock or chicken stock will work just as fine. So I've got a big pan here on a really high heat, and I've got this other pan here. Oh, that's the wrong one. Also on a high heat. I'm going to add olive oil to both. In this pan, we're going to seal off our lamb. Once it's got good color, it's going to go in this pan. In this pan, we are going to add the onions and carrots, saute them down, then we'll add the garlic, the rosemary, and the beef as we're cooking it. So break your beef up in the pan as it goes. Oh, sorry. Break your lamb up as you're putting it in the pan. And the onions and carrots go. You're going to move that there because it's a bigger hob. Once you put your lamb in, just leave it. You're trying to, you know, get some of that mie out on the bottom. Break the bigger bits up a little bit. Pinch of salt in both. So this here is what you're looking for. And be as much of that color as you can, because that's going to help with the overall flavor of your end dish. Once you got some nice color developing on the bottom, give it a toss and let it break it up a little bit and leave it in there a bit longer. So now our onions and garlic have sweated down for about 4 or 5 minutes. We can add the garlic and the rosemary. We'll also add the tomato puree, stir that all through. So this first batch of lamb is almost ready. In that goes. And we just repeat with the rest of the lamb. So at this point, because we want quite a thick gravy with our lamb at the end, we're going to add flour to this pan. We've only got some of the lamb in there, but that's okay. There'll be enough fat to absorb most of this flour. We only need about, say, 1.5 tablespoons. Take that out, then sprinkle it across all of it and stir it through. So what this will do is going to absorb all that delicious fat. It's also going to cook the flour out, which is really important. And then once we add our stock to this, that flour should thicken that stock up just a little bit. Because for me, a shepherd's pie isn't a dish that takes half a day to cook. We're not going to stew this lamb for hours and hours and break it down. We want a bit of texture there. And we want some thickness of the gravy to coat that lamb. Just keep a real close eye on this other pot now. As soon as you put that flour in there, you'll find that it'll stick to the bottom of the pan, which is fine. You're just going to make sure that you scrape it off and keep cooking it. If you don't scrape it off, it'll burn. So you get to this point like I have here, and I'm starting to get concerned about the bottom of this pan really catching a bit more than I'd like. Just use a splash of stock. That's just going to stop it from burning, kind of deglaze the bottom of that pan. It'll evaporate anyway. So all our lamb's in here, we're just going to stir it through. At this point, we're going to add our bay leaves, Worcestershire sauce, very important. I like a lot of Worcestershire sauce. So I'm going to say add 10 dashes, but I'm probably going to add that much. Look at that. Looks luscious just like that. Give me a piece of sourdough and put that on top and I'll be a happy boy. Okay, so stock. Just be careful how much stock we add here. We don't want to add a crazy amount, and we can keep adding more. You know, we have got a little bit of flour in here to help thicken this, but also I want to make sure that we get all this fond off the pan. So this is like the final consistency that I reckon we're looking for, but we've got a little bit more cooking time left. So I'm going to add the rest of the stock and it should reduce down. So there's only 2 other ingredients that we need to put in here. The peas we'll do last minute, right before we even put it in the dish, because the peas are frozen peas. They'll cook in the amount of time that this is in the oven, no problem. But here's a secret. This is what I was always taught to do. Call me a cheat. call me whatever. A stock cube. Now you can use lamb ones if you can get them, beef ones also, or chicken ones. It's just powdered flavour. It'll just amp up the amount of kind of meatiness, and I'm sure, I don't actually know, but I'm guessing they're full of MSG too, which is also delicious stuff. All right, so that's gonna simmer. I'm actually gonna put the lid on it and just simmer it really slowly for about 30 minutes, which is the perfect amount of time to get your potatoes ready. So the mash, I'm not gonna show you how to make mash again, just like the French one. The only difference is less milk. You want it a bit stiffer. Why? Because we're not gonna pipe this. We're gonna put this on with this actually, and we're gonna have lots of ridges, and the ridges are what creates lovely texture. We're gonna want nice and crispy. So this is our finished product of our lamb. I think for me, this is exactly the right consistency. When you pull it back in the pan, there is a little bit of moisture there still, and it's clinging to the lamb pretty well. So the only other thing we need to do is add the peas. So I'm gonna turn the temperature off now. Peas go in. I also sometimes put corn in this. That really might freak people out. Stir the peas through the lamb. If you see the bay leaves, pull those out on your way. I just saw one, now I can't find it. There we go, there's one. Pretty sure I put 2 in there. Oh well, someone will get that in their dinner. So I've got a nice tray, or an oven safe dish. In goes our lamb, keeping an eye out for that other sneaky bay leaf. Spread that out. Oh, there it is, found it. Make sure you get all that goodness. And for me, personally, I want kind of about 2/3 full, the dish, with the lamb. And that gives you 1/3 of straight mash, and then the bit of the extra, all the valleys and crevices that we're gonna try and make. This might be too much mash, but we'll see. So take like a spoonful and start around the edges. So you can just kind of, I quite like to seal my edges in, and it stops it from like bubbling up a bit too much, if that makes sense. Okay, now dollops. Sometimes it helps to have a spoon handy. So what we want is all this shape. We want lots of texture here. We can come back through and, you know, reshape it as well. So we want uniformity. Does that make sense? No. Basically what I'm trying to say is we want an even layer of potato, but then we want lots of texture at the top. So you do that by kind of pushing into the potato. So then when you push into the potato, instead of going like that and going straight back out, kind of push away as you go out, and you'll get lots of lovely ridges. Panko breadcrumbs. Now my mum used to also put crushed up salt and vinegar chips on this, which kind of makes sense, right? By all means, try it. But I kind of do panko these days, mainly because there's always panko in my fruit, in my pantry. But it does kind of crisp up, especially when the fats from the cheese you're about to put on start to kind of split away. It gives that something to attach to. So I've got some nice strong cheddar here, and we're going to go pretty liberal. Make sure you get the sides too. If it's not hitting the board, you're not doing it right. It does feel a little bit wasteful, but it does mean that you're getting an even coverage. And you can pull it off the board and put it on the top anyway. Or I'll just eat them. Look at that, yum. Get those extra bits on top. There you go, in the oven. Oven set to 180 degrees, and we're gonna leave it in there for, because everything's hot, it's probably only gonna take 25 minutes, but we'll come back and check when it's ready. Hot tip also, put a tray underneath it, otherwise you'll destroy your oven. Oh, look at that. Cheesy, crispy, yum. All right, almost on cue, the rain has started, which kind of sets the mood perfectly for this dish, and it's time to try them and crown the winner. Who's gonna take it out? Good crunch there on the shepherd's pie. We'll start with the French. Tell you what, that meat looks pretty good. Yummy. And the Old Faithful, the one I grew up eating, can it be knocked off its perch as one of the ultimate comfort meals of all time. Yummy. Quite different flavour profiles. You know, quite a meaty, beefy flavour to the Team France here, which I do really enjoy. And a little bit of sweetness coming through from the carrots and the balsamic. It's delicious. I also do really like this Comte de top and the really silky mash. A shepherd's pie is like a flavour that I grew up with and has heaps of nostalgia attached to it. And even things like the pea flavour in there, I think really helps bring that dish together. I also like the fact that it does have a crispier top on the shepherd's pie. The other thing I want to take into account is the fact that this took me the best part of 5 hours to make. This one I can bash out in under an hour without even trying. For that reason, I think the winner is still the shepherd's pie. Round of applause for the shepherd's pie. This is delicious, and if you've got a Sunday where you're just hanging out at home and you want to cook, that's definitely worth having a crack, but you can't beat the Old Faithful. Legends, thanks so much for watching. Like this video if you took anything from it, subscribe if you're not, and we'll see you next week for another video. Peace.